Hello everyone, my name is Tim Phillips. I'm Managing Director of CBD-Intel, speaking with you here on Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night?
Hello listeners, and welcome to another episode of Professionally Cannabis, your friend and guide during these dark quarantine times, fearlessly reporting every week, despite huge personal danger to ourselves and our guests. No, I'm just kidding. We record this remotely, don't we, Johnny?
Yes, we do indeed. And how is lockdown treating you? Because I know for me, it is, I think, for the first time starting to get to me. For the last few nights, I've had what I can only describe as cheese dreams. However, I actually haven't eaten any cheese in a long time. Having some really whimsical dreams, perhaps even more whimsical than some of our openings and outros for this podcast. How are you keeping?
I've gone through my quarantinis and I've drunk all my drink and done all my lounging around, and now I am actually ready to be let out again. Yes, and our guest today, Tim, is out all the way in Barcelona, somewhere that would be lovely to be this time of year, slipping into and out of the cannabis clubs, checking out the big squares in the sun and the botellón. But let's not dream of what we could be doing, but instead hear about what's going on.
Absolutely. Listeners, enjoy. I'm pleased to say that today we're joined by Tim Phillips, the founder and managing director of CBD-Intel, a regulatory and market intelligence company providing insights and data for the CBD sector worldwide. Joining us from a remote cottage on the outskirts of Barcelona due to the coronavirus restrictions, we're so glad you're able to be with us today over the interwebs. Tim, welcome to Professionally Cannabis.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction as well. That was fun. And it's really nice to be here. Yeah, and I hope that despite me being in the middle of the countryside, you can hear me okay.
I think that will be for our listeners to judge, but I'm hoping they'll get a hearty yes. So, Tim, welcome to Professionally Cannabis. And we'd like to start off with what led you to the plant.
Yeah, sure. Well, you did give me a sort of heads up that you might be asking these questions, so I had to think about it. And it's funny when you think back, well, why exactly am I involved in this sector? Because it is quite unique and quite strange in many ways, certainly when you tell friends that you're involved in the cannabis sector. So I think the truth about it, the reason why I'm involved is almost like a sort of academic reason that I find the development of the CBD sector in particular, which is what we focus on, the kind of subset of the cannabis sector. I find it really, really interesting. I think I was a little bit cynical about it when I first came into it, and I've tried CBD. For me, the CBD product doesn't work particularly. It doesn't make a lot of difference to things, and maybe that's because I'm lucky and I don't have things that I need to use it for. But I was fascinated by the fact that this market was growing. It was growing really quite fast through consumers telling each other about it. Companies weren't able to go out there and market the product very much, but very quickly the sector grew, and it grew despite kind of being in a very difficult regulatory position, which was kind of neither one thing or another. It was neither a medical cannabis product with the sort of medical regulations that go around that, and neither was it clearly an illegal product with all the kind of criminal sanctions and so on around that. So it was more that sort of academic interest of why is this sector growing so fast? And also my background as a lawyer, I find it very interesting to see how laws and the development of regulation around new sectors, particularly innovative sectors like this, how it affects the development of a market. So I think, so that's my answer really. It's quite an academic reason. As a company, we've looked at a number of sectors which are kind of, in principle, very innovative, very fast growing, but they generally have lots of regulatory issues that tend to be controversial sectors. So we also look at vaping and we look at some other products that are sort of similar. And I think they're fascinating. And I think CBD for me is an example of that. It's a really fascinating area to be in.
And would you be able to give our listeners an insight into how you and your team go about collecting this data and packaging up in report form? I think in particular with the CBD market, it's one which is very fast-paced, which creates a lot of regulatory flux across the world.
Yeah, no, it's really an interesting question. And you're right, it is very fast moving. So one of the things I would say straight up is that we do produce reports, but in fact, a lot of our work is ongoing iterative process, and we publish stuff every day. So we're updating our subscribers on a daily basis with what's going on. We don't spend 3 months producing the definitive guide to regulation in Germany because, as you rightly point out, by the time we publish it, it will have all changed. So it tends to be a very fast moving pace kind of business, and we have various kind of databases that we update on a very regular basis. We send out emails to our subscribers very regularly to kind of keep them updated with alerts on what's happening. Look, but you also asked about the methodology and how do we pull all this data together. So on the regulatory side, we have a team of lawyers, and in fact, look, total number of people, we have 30 people, and they're not all dedicated to CBD, but that's quite a lot of people. And we have a kind of global network of analysts on a freelance basis who feed us in information. The legal team are in constant contact, and having done this for 6 years, we have quite a lot of good contacts with relevant government departments, sector experts, lawyers in the relevant countries. So we have that kind of approach, and we've built it up with the e-cig intelligence service, and we're using the same methodologies for CBD-Intel. On the market side, again, I think you alluded to this, that there are thousands of products. The market is incredibly fragmented, and the distribution channels are very fragmented and often quite opaque. The companies in the sectors are, in the most part, independent companies. They don't publish publicly their sales data. So it is a very different environment to try to gather data on compared to, some kind of product that is very consolidated. I don't know, some kind of beverage or something like that. If you were trying to track products that go through normal distribution channels, it's much easier. But I think because this is so new and because it's very fragmented and there's thousands of different products, we use a lot of different techniques to try to get data. We use multiple sources. So we do a lot of online tracking. Obviously, that's a very important channel for the CBD sector, and more so in some countries versus others. We do a whole wave of surveys every either 6 months or a year. So we tend to survey 1,000 to 2,000 CBD users in the countries that we cover. We're covering, I guess, what we think of as something like the top 15 markets at the moment, but we're trying to expand that all the time. And so we get a lot of sort of proprietary information back from our surveys as to what consumers are doing, what attitudes do they have to the products, what kind of products are they using, where are they buying, how much are they spending, all that kind of stuff. And then we validate that with conversations that we have directly with some of the leading brands in the market to try to get a fix on how big the market is. And I guess one point on that, I think that the cannabis market has been really guilty in general of overinflating the size of the market, exaggerating how fast it's growing, just generally kind of trying to puff up the prospects of the market. And a lot of that was down to trying to push share prices up and trying just to keep that whole thing going. And maybe we can talk about this a bit more, but, cannabis 2.0, which is what everyone is now talking about, the kind of the new cannabis industry kind of coming out of the ashes of sort of disastrous drop in value in a lot of the big listed companies over the last year. I think cannabis 2.0 is going to be a good time for people to really take stock of what's an exaggerated estimate of the market and what's actually going on the ground. And I hope we fit into that latter category of really trying to get to grips with what consumers are doing and how big is this opportunity. So that's a bit about how we go about it.
Looping back to your point around the top 15 markets, and I think my question here is probably more geographical in nature than anything. So why have you chosen to base yourself in Spain, and which are the top 15 markets that you look at? Maybe don't go through top 15, but are there any in there that some would be surprised about or less surprised about? How do you geographically pick where you look at CBD and where you place the business?
Yeah, well, so where we placed the business was just sort of an accident, really, that I happened to be here and we had a team that we built here in Barcelona, and, these things happen, don't they? I mean, looking back on it, I think that we were very lucky to be in Barcelona. Interestingly, it is seen in many cases as being quite a center in Europe for the cannabis sector. Partly that's driven by the fact that there's a lot of cannabis clubs in Barcelona, but partly it's just because of the regulatory environment and the way that Spain looks at the product. As for the largest markets for CBD, well, it's still growing. I mean, the obvious candidates are, that everyone would think of as the largest markets. So clearly the US, the UK is the leading market in Europe. Markets in general that are bigger tend to have a number of factors that make sense. They tend to have kind of high GDP per capita, so lots of disposable income. They tend to be markets that are open to it from a regulatory perspective. So if there are massive regulatory barriers, then it's very difficult for CBD to take hold. And we've seen that happen in a number of European markets, where there may be lots of consumer appetite, but it's very difficult to get products out to market. And particularly, where your regulators and the police and so on are really cracking down, that's the problem. We've seen markets like Japan really grow. Quite interesting. Japan has an aging population, very high disposable income. They're very open to kind of new technology, new fads, if you like. They're very into health and wellness products in Japan. So CBD is just kind of really starting to grow there. It's growing from a low base, but it's kind of coming through quite fast. I suspect we're going to see some other markets grow. Brazil is quite an interesting market. There are markets that are starting to go, but certainly sub-Saharan Africa right now is not a major focus for us. We don't see CBD taking hold much there yet.
And talking about global markets and health and wellness, it would be not current of us not to bring up the coronavirus and the impact that is having on the market. From my side, I'd be really interested, in looking at the market impact of COVID-19, namely examining the changes in retail and the implications of regulatory delay. For example, recently we've heard about the proposed delay of the EU medical device regulation. There will certainly be others. Really be keen to hear your 2 cents on this.
Yeah. I'm amazed that we've spent this long speaking without speaking about coronavirus, actually. So, great. But of course, we have to deal with it, don't we? Look, I mean, it's really clear that this is a massive watershed for pretty much everything that's going on, right? So CBD is no different. It's going to have enormous impact. I think the 2 issues that you brought up, absolutely very relevant. It's going to change retail, not just in the few months while people are locked down and unable to go to shops and shops are closed. I think it's going to have a massive long-term impact on the way that consumers buy products. And clearly, the obvious thing to say, online is probably going to be doing well out of this. I suspect online channels are going to become more important for CBD, and companies that can really embrace that online channel, whether it's just kind of doing what a lot of companies have already done. So just being really, really good at getting product out through the online channel, or are there new models that are going to come through? Is there some kind of a subscription model that can work in CBD? It's definitely been tried in some other sectors and it's very successful. Will it work with CBD? I don't think anyone knows, but it might well do. So I think there's that. I think that the way that when things do go back to normal and we do have retail environment back, what will happen to that retail environment? I think it'll be very different. And, I suspect that there will be all sorts of question marks over the business models for dedicated stores selling CBD. I'm not sure whether that's going to be the right path through, but, we're yet to see. I mean, we're also looking at it, by the way, on the vape side. We're looking at vape stores and very similar kind of business model where you have a dedicated independent store selling vape products. They're quite precarious, these kinds of retail environments. They can work. You can get a very dedicated, base of consumers that come to your store. And particularly in vape, that was the case. I think there's some evidence to suggest that customers are becoming quite loyal to particular stores selling CBD. But one of the biggest problems with CBD, frankly, is that there aren't really leading brands, and consumers do tend to be swapping around brand to brand. It's been very difficult to establish brands, and I suspect, in a retail environment, that's a problem. And then the other point you raised about regulation is absolutely right as well. We're seeing huge amounts of delay coming through for regulations. So, new policy is just not top priority at the moment for governments. And you can see that in all sorts of things. So, the Brexit negotiations are basically completely stalled during coronavirus. Of course they are. That's not moving forward. But, if Brexit's delayed, for goodness sake, any kind of regulations around CBD is going to be well down the priority list for a government. So, there's going to be a massive knock-on impact on getting regulation through. I think that's a great shame, because I think, particularly in the UK, I think we were starting to see a regulatory environment develop. And, that I think is going to be the only way for the CBD sector to grow and start to become mainstream and start to kind of develop a proper consolidated industry. At the moment, it's very much a fragmented set of companies who are, some of whom are doing really well, but many of whom are just kind of trying to get in there and sell as fast as they can. And I think a regulated environment is the only real way to make that market kind of a long-term opportunity. But as we've said, I think that coronavirus is going to severely delay a lot of the regulatory development, and therefore it's going to delay the development of a mature market. So agreed. I think those two things are really good points. I've got some other thoughts. I don't know whether that's of interest about coronavirus. I don't know whether that...
I would like to hear the other thoughts about coronavirus. And I also wanted a little bit more on UK regulations, because you mentioned that some were coming in, and that's got to be with regards to the Food Standards Agency talking about the novel foods applications that need to be in by March 2021, which along with Brexit and everything else will probably be delayed by Corona. So I'd love to hear more about that and more on Corona.
Yeah. Okay, well, so look, my more overview point about coronavirus was just, I think that it may also change attitudes towards things like science, or attitudes in general towards things like facts. I think that we've been going through a period, over the last kind of 5 years or so, where fact-based science has been a bit less important than knee-jerk reaction and political grandstanding. We've definitely seen that in the vape sector. We're seeing it quite a lot in the cannabis sector as well, where people are ignoring kind of scientific evidence in favor of what they feel about a subject. And after all, that's, I guess that is an explanation as to why Trump is in power and Brexit happened and various things. So it's been a sort of a global phenomenon, this idea of kind of ignoring facts. I think that coronavirus is going to have the opposite impact. I think people are suddenly waking up to the fact that science is really important. It's really important to understand and have people in charge who base their decisions on facts. I'm being optimistic, but I really hope that that's the impact of coronavirus. So going back to the UK and novel food, yes, it's a crucial kind of watershed moment. I suspect you're right that it may well cause some kind of delay in the March 2021 deadline. But I think that there will also, just bringing in that first point I made, I think there will just be a pull back towards fact-based decision-making. And CBD has done extremely well without really any science to back it up. And I think it's, that's great. It's actually, people complain about the way that the regulations are developing and how governments are meddling in the CBD sector, and we should just be allowed to do what we want. The reality is that I think governments in the future are going to want to base decisions on facts. They're going to be more cautious. They're going to be careful about opening up markets. CBD has established itself really well without very much government interference. And I think people forget that. People think that things can go into the food chain and they should be allowed to go in the food chain just because, lots of people have been using CBD and have liked it. So therefore CBD what's the point of having novel food requirements and regulations around CBD? The reality is, I think post-coronavirus, people are going to be a lot more conservative around this. They're going to want to know that products are safe, and they're going to want to know that products they're buying have gone through relevant testing processes and are safe to use. So my view long-term, again, is that there's going to be sort of return to science. I think it's a good thing, but the industry needs to really step up to that and start to really do some proper work about studying the impacts of CBD and how it works on the human body. And that's the only way this industry is going to step forward, I think.
I think I totally disagree on the scientific point that you're making in terms of a cultural shift.
Okay.
And you must be party to these WhatsApp messages or Facebook or email forwards that say, don't have any ibuprofen, you mustn't do this, you must do that. I think in this fast-paced, dangerous and scary time, people are saying, I want a solution that works now, and I'm scared to wait for randomized controlled trials or all the things that cannabinoids and cannabis-based medicines waiting for. I think people right now are thrusting themselves into what could be closer to observational trials or anecdotal evidence, certainly not to the gold standard for medicine. I mean, no one is urging caution with any of these email forwards or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, look, again, you've definitely got a point. I mean, here are some examples. So one is that we're seeing a lot of emails flying around suggesting that coronavirus is passed on by vaping. And so the vape particles carry the coronavirus, and therefore it's much more dangerous, and therefore vaping should be banned. And you're getting this happening a lot. Now, it's more focused on vaping nicotine products. So it's the vape sector, the e-cigarette sector that's been hit quite hard by these kind of WhatsApp messages. You're absolutely right. That's what's flying around. The science behind it is being a bit swallowed up, but there's been various scientists who've, done some work on this and saying there's no way that, the particles in the vapor are transferring coronavirus. But that's kind of ignored, isn't it? In this whole kind of media frenzy around getting solutions immediately. So look, I have some sympathy about all of that. The only other thing, and I think this is to your point that, which slightly counters what I was saying, is, people are also looking for solutions now. And, CBD is clearly something that is helping a lot of people with things like anxiety. So coronavirus is potentially a perfect environment for this product. It's helping people to get through a very worrying time. So, arguably it will do well as a result of some of this as well. But long term, I still think that there are going to be more and more questions asked about products like this. And you're right, maybe right now people need a fix, an immediate kind of solution. But I think long term, people are going to want to have some kind of certainty that the products are safe. And that's, I don't think the industry, to be fair, has been doing that much about safety up till now. It will be forced to be in a regulated environment, but what I'm saying is I think that's a good thing.
Something I'd like to move us on to is looking at CBD customer and consumer segments. You touched upon before how, CBD products might actually experience an increase in uptake as a result of coronavirus. Of course, CBD for a lot of people is associated with reducing stress, reducing anxiety. I think in these times where people are isolating, quarantined, cooped up, it might well be a product that new consumers might go on to try. I'd love to hear a little bit of your insights around pre-corona consumer segments and sort of how consumers behave in different ways and in those different segments. And perhaps as an extension of that, ask you to look into a crystal ball and give a prediction as to what these segments might look like 2-3 months from now. And if you expect to see any difference as a result of what people around the world are having to deal with right now?
Yeah, really interesting question. I don't have a crystal ball. You won't be surprised to know, but I can certainly give you my thoughts. So I think segmentation is a really interesting area because up until quite recently, I think people were looking at the CBD sector and they were just kind of like, what kind of people use CBD? And I think what, we and a lot of people have started to realize is that depending on the product that CBD goes into, and there's a vast range of different types of products that CBD is being used, whether it's, the main categories obviously are oils and vape and topical skin creams. But, around that and amongst that as well, there's huge numbers of different types of products. And I think what we're seeing is that consumers of one are very different to consumers of the other. So a consumer who is using a sublingual oil on a daily basis and they're using it for reducing anxiety and stress, let's say, are very different to the types of consumers that are using a CBD skin cream to reduce sports injuries, for example. And so I think it's almost pointless trying to look at the CBD consumers as a single group because it really doesn't exist, So we've been doing quite a lot of work on trying to sort of segment the different groups and try to understand what they do. Another major sort of factor that's going on, and again, this goes back a little bit to the kind of over-exuberance of the industry and the fact that people were thinking this was going to grow forever and ever and CBD was going to be massive, billions and billions of dollars. I think what's turned out is that we've had a period of very fast growth where loads and loads of people talk about CBD and lots of people are trying it for the first time. But what's coming through quite loud and clear is that you've got really quite high churn rates. You've got a lot of people coming in, trying the product, doesn't really work for them, and they leave the category. That might be for a lot of reasons. It might be because, like similar to someone like me, where, I use a product and it doesn't really do very much. It might also be that you've got a problem with trying to educate a consumer about what sort of product they need, what kind of strengths of CBD do they need, all of these kinds of things I think consumers are very confused, and there's a real kind of need for education on that product set. So, but in general, I think it's really important to distinguish these types of consumer groups. And the people who come in for a kind of a wellness reason because one of their friends says it's a good idea is very different from someone who's buying, a very strong CBD sublingual oil, and they're using it daily and they need it because they've got back pain and it really helps with their back pain. So I think what we're starting to see is a market emerge in Cannabis 2.0, where we've got a set of consumers who are using it on a very regular basis. It absolutely works for them. They need the product. They need to buy it, on a regular basis. And we're losing quite a lot of those people who might have just come in and sort of tried a CBD beverage and thought it was quite fun. And that's good. That's the normal sort of trajectory of sort of innovative market growing fast. And I think we're just in that stage now where we're starting to see a smaller group, a kind of hardcore of consumers, but those are the ones who are going to be using the products on a very regular basis going forward. You asked about what's the crystal ball? What are we going to see going forward? I think it's going to be innovative products, but they're really focused on particular segments. So, I think sports focused topical creams is going to be a big area. I really do. Obviously, the sublingual oils are doing really well, but there's a big focus, I think, on getting away from oils that don't really taste very nice. And I think trying to get that consumer experience better, where you've got sort of nice flavors and the whole product is more appealing, is going to be really important going forward. And we've started to see a big change in the market for sublingual oils. Actually, you're starting to get a lot more oils come in that are trying to be more approachable for consumers that may not want to have that really strong hempy flavor in their mouth. So I think those are where I think we're going to see products that are developed that are very focused on particular segments and are focused on not consumers just coming in for, just to try a product because someone's told them it's a good idea, but products that are designed for people who really need it on a regular basis.
What do you think the industry and companies operating within the CBD industry can do around that sort of consumer education piece to reduce churn? For example, you mentioned about how some folks are coming into the market. Well, some folks are engaging with CBD. They're trying one product. It might not work for them, and then they don't engage with CBD again. I can see a situation, for example, here where someone goes and buys a CBD hand sanitizer. Now, it's probably going to kill the germs, but is it necessarily going to make them feel chilled out versus a high concentrate tincture? Potentially, the jury's out. What do you think the industry can do in this regard?
Yeah, CBD hand sanitizers. I mean, I don't know how many versions of that I've seen pop up in the last few weeks. Amazing. Yeah, I think, as I said, I think that the education thing is difficult. There are a few things. I think one is that the industry kind of needs to consolidate. There needs to be a set of standard types of products. And at the moment, you can buy all sorts of different strengths of oils, all sorts of different sizes of bottles. And frankly, the prices are completely wildly different between these different products. So how on earth does a consumer decide what to buy, right? Even when they're in the shop. Now, I know that retailers are starting to kind of consolidate down on one standard format. And so they want to have products that a consumer can go in and look at the shelf and compare one to another. So that's going to help. I think that sort of industry consolidation process is going to help anyway. Again, I think that the industry also needs to kind of back up some kind of science to be able to say to consumers, look, we've done some work and these are the best types of products for you. And, until we have that, then it's going to be very difficult for the industry to move forward, I think, because different manufacturers of different products are going to say that theirs are the best, and there's nothing really objective that you can point to back that up. So I think, again, I come back to my point about science. I think there just needs to be a lot more work done on this to be able to demonstrate what consumers need, and then you can go through a process of educating the consumer, and that's what brands need to do. But I think they've got to have something to back it up with.
For me, I wanted to talk about the product's direction. So you mentioned that there was a move towards better tasting oils or things that have a better consumer experience. Do you think that varies by consumer segment, wellness versus medicinal? And do you also think that there's going to be a lack of correlation between product preference with consumers and potential cannabinoid content? Are people going to pick the snake oil that tastes nice rather than the true hempy CBD? What's the future product implications of this trend?
Yeah, well, look, they might choose the better flavored snake oil versus the properly produced and, quite strong, heavy, large CBD content product, but they'll only choose it once. And so I think very quickly consumers decide which products work and which don't. And I think you can have a strategy which is, well, let's just make something that tastes nice and pretend that it works. But I think consumers, are much better informed and make decisions based on, on whether it works or not. And let's face it, they're spending quite a lot of money on this product category as well. So these things are not cheap at the moment. Prices are coming down. I'm sure that they're going to be more approachable, and that those prices of the raw ingredients are going to continue to come down. But I think that the consumers will decide with their feet. They're going to decide the products that work for them. And it's not going to be based on, being told that something's better. It's going to be based on whether they buy it and they really like it and they tell their friends that it works. That's going to be the real test. So I think we're going to see consolidation of this. And I think that the brands that are out there that are snake oil are going to fall out of the market anyway, because the consumers are starting to consolidate. We're starting to lose those people who are buying it for the first time, trying it because they got told to try it. We're starting to see a market consolidate around a smaller group of consumers who know what they want, who like brands that work for them. And hopefully, as part of that process, we're going to start to build proper brands in the sector as well, brands that people recognize and that have brand value, and that's something that all markets that consolidate need to go through. But hopefully that's what's going to happen in the CBD sector as well.
One of the things Oscar touched upon also is around sort of varied cannabinoid content. What do you think the future is for products that use cannabinoids, not just CBD, but perhaps in the future sort of a wider variety of different compounds? Increasingly seeing
CBG and stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. In terms of consumer bases, how many cannabinoids do you think can be entered into the public consciousness and actually be responded to in a strong way by consumers buying these products before, broadly speaking, for society, cannabis is demystified?
What I think does seem to be emerging is that every individual has a different metabolism and reacts differently to different cannabinoids. And I think there's been quite a lot of interesting discussion around kind of creating a unique cannabinoid profile for each different person. So, kind of very medical, but very personalized medicine. And I really, I think that that's a very interesting concept, really complicated, very difficult to do. And clearly, the end point would be that I can go in for a test and I can get a report based on various tests done on my body of what kind of cannabinoid mix I need. I think that's super interesting. I think that's probably where things are going to go, but maybe more on the medical side. And I like this idea of kind of personalized medicine that's focused very much on the individual. But it completely turns traditional Western medicine on its head, which has always been about, take a single pill for a particular symptom. And here it is, go and take that. That's going to work for your headache, your back pain, and so on. So it's a very different way of thinking about medicine. In terms of commercially, what do I think about different cannabinoids? I think in general, the general market is still based around CBD. And so CBD is what consumers are going into shops to ask for. There's a big gap between getting them to understand what CBD is and then starting to introduce new cannabinoids, CBG and all the others. So I think part of this is slightly driven by the industry, frankly. I think the industry would love to find a way to commercialize some of the other cannabinoids that they're extracting out of the plant. And I think there's evidence clearly that some of those cannabinoids are really good for certain kind of medical and wellness purposes. But I think we're a long way from getting the consumer to understand that, frankly. We've got a long way to go. I mean, my mum, for example, anecdotally, knows what CBD is, very comfortable with it as a product. Lots of her friends use it. She understands it. She thinks it's quite interesting. she has no idea what the other cannabinoids are. She barely knows that CBD is part of the cannabis plant. So I think there's a long way to go before starting to talk about the thousands of different products that might be available with different combinations of cannabinoids in them.
I'd like to go a little more into the future of cannabis, and seeing as you're in Barcelona, Tim, I'd like to get your feeling on recreational cannabis, what that means for your company, what it means for the markets you look at, and hell, do you enjoy going into any of the cannabis clubs in Barcelona?
Yes. So recreational cannabis, kind of sort of the academic thing. So what do I think is happening with recreational cannabis? I think part of the problem with Cannabis 1.0 was that North American companies which were very heavily funded on the back of thinking that the rest of the world was going to open up to recreational cannabis like North America had. So, I think a lot of that early exuberance around cannabis was that suddenly we're going to have, markets all across Europe and Asia opening up to a product which replaces alcohol, which provides, a sort of secondary route to medical applications and so on. I think what's emerging is that that's not going to happen anytime soon. It will happen at some point, and I really hope it does. And I think it will open up. I think it's inevitable that countries will see cannabis in a different light to other prohibited kind of drugs, but it's going to take a long time. So Europe, for example, UK as a great example, it moved quite fast to open up medical applications for cannabis. It's not gone the way that a lot of people hoped. I think that many patients have not been able to get cannabis subscribed. It's been very slow. And, the prospects for opening up an adult market in the UK, I think, are pretty slim in the next 5 years. So, that's gone much, much slower. So the interesting thing about the cannabis clubs in Barcelona is that they are effectively a regulatory dodge around the ban on adult recreational cannabis sales. And there are the 200 or 300 clubs in Barcelona. You have a personal right to grow cannabis plants under the legislation, in Catalonia, and you can subcontract your right to grow plants to a club, which then grow for you, and you pay the expenses of growing. So it's an interesting way of kind of managing the cannabis sector in Barcelona. I think it has its ups and downs. I think various city councils have come through, and some have been quite pro the clubs and some quite anti. I think there's lots of problems with it, but I suspect that kind of style will continue to grow around Europe. Obviously Amsterdam was the best known for that. In fact, the Amsterdam cannabis clubs have become much more restricted. So I think we're going to see that kind of unofficial route through to adult markets before we see big regulatory changes going on.
Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up. Tim, I've got to say thank you so much for joining us. Keep safe.
Thank you so much, Jonathan Oscar. Really nice to talk to you. Yeah, take care.
Where do they go? The smoke rings I blow.
Well, listener, we hope you enjoyed that episode. I know from my perspective, always a pleasure to talk to and hear from Tim. He's someone that I've heard speak a number of different times and always has a huge amount of insight to bring to the table. Oscar, how did you find it?
Well, as you say, this isn't the first time listening to Tim speak, and he's quite the authority on a range of subjects, so I was glad that we could have him in our house for this one. But as ever, another great hearing from the man.
Absolutely. And listener, if you enjoyed having Tim in your house as well, we'd really urge you to please do like, share, subscribe, and comment on the pod. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we'd also love you to pass the pod on to a friend, colleague, or anyone else who you think could really get value or might enjoy listening to the pod.
And for now, listener, sayonara, and we'll see you next week.
Hello. Please take me above, take me with you.